One. Hey, everybody in the Crushable universe. Sean Corbett here.
Hey guys, it's Laura here.
We're going to do a little roundup of 2020, a little look forward to 2021. So, Laura, was a pretty busy year for us, eh?
Yeah, it's been really great looking back. The waves of emotions that were experienced. I think every single one in the emotional rainbow, whatever you want to call it, it was quite a spectrum. So
It was exciting to offer some of the producers this year and deal with. I mean, I hate to say this out loud, but COVID. Not only did COVID not really affect our business this year, and I'm sure some people listening, it affected you a lot, and obviously that's brutal. But it was interesting that the wine world and especially clubs like ours were able to pivot and serve people in their homes and at least bring a tiny little bit of joy to a really strange and messed up year.
yeah, yeah, that's the conversation that I've been having a lot, especially with it being New Year's Eve and the wave of emotion, like I was saying, that I experienced at the beginning, like when I did a roundup of some of the blog posts that I wrote this past year, and the despair that I felt in March versus now, and the hope and the optimism that I have. It's been quite a journey and a lot of growth experience that I'm actually quite thankful for. So
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with you. So before we started this recording, Laura and I were just talking. We are frequently staying in touch with each other, not just about the crushable offers, but about our own growth and our friends' growth and the winemakers we know in the industry. And obviously, it's just a constant stream of learning. And often when I would log on at night and I would type something to Laura, she's drinking and she's talking to winemakers and she's saying, "Oh man, I just realized what this thing was. I just had this discovery." So I wanted to ask you, Laura, what was your biggest winemaking discovery of the year? And it could be a technique, an insight into the process, something that just kind of finally became clear to you after being opaque, or maybe something that you had read about for many years, but it was meaningless until you finally tasted what was going on in the glass.
yeah, so I think I was thinking about this last night, and I mean, it's already well known that I'm a total Avril Creek fangirl, and I utilize Brent as a resource, but it's because he's so unbelievably open and willing, and he's so approachable and down to earth and humble. And what he really opened my eyes to was whole cluster fermentation. Now that I've spoken to him and him having worked with some of the greats that have really perfected the technique all over Burgundy, New Zealand, Australia. So we're talking like by far escarpment and what have you. These are the guys that have really figured it out. But what I really love about how Brent explains it is that although he has the sort of technical background in explaining why it works and why he employs it in his winemaking, he so his entire approach, which we have mentioned many, many times in our emails when talking about Avril Creek, he either does 100% whole cluster or none at all, because he feels that the benefit is sort of lost if you only go halfway. And I think that's also a testament to who he is as a person. And it's been really eye-opening for me in speaking with other winemakers when I ask them about this. People are nervous about it. They don't really want to go all in. It's kind of like, transitioning from conventional to natural wine. But you really only seek the full benefits when you jump and you go all in. And so that's really been interesting to me. And looking back to some of the tastings, that maybe I was doing, or some of the alleged experts that I have met. And one person in particular is coming to mind, who I will not name, but it's a big, big name in the wine world. I'll tell you after we stop recording, but I
Perfect.
did a tasting with this person. They happened to come into a winery that I was working at. And whole cluster is a term that I think is thrown around a lot, that a lot of people don't wholeheartedly really understand. So a lot of this like greenness and stemminess and all of this kind of stuff comes out, but they don't really understand what exactly is that they're saying. And so in speaking with Brent throughout this year, and I've gone back to him a number of times, like, okay, can you explain it to me again? And it's this whole approach of fermentation kinetics and the extraction and different sort of like aromas and perfume that you get from whole cluster that you wouldn't from other types of fermentation. And Paul Pender alluded to this as well when we were doing the Taz feature as well. So it's just yet again another revelation that I've had that's barreled me down into a whole host of different techniques and approaches, and opened so many other doors too. It's just this whole thing that I keep coming back to, like the more you know, the less you know. It just humbles you more and more and more and more. And it just becomes this lifelong journey of learning. So yeah.
Clarify what you were saying. You're saying some people are afraid to go all the way. Is that because they're afraid that it's going to become like that greenness and bitterness is going to take over, basically? Yeah.
Yeah. But it's sort of counterintuitive, because if you don't go all
Right.
in, like this is me just quoting what has been shared with me. If you only go in 50 or 25 or 75%, you're sort of defeating the purpose of doing it entirely. So
Because the conventional wisdom, or what at least what we heard when we moved to BC and did a lot of tastings in tasting rooms. So this isn't necessarily coming from winemakers. Perhaps it's just coming from uh, pouring staff, and maybe they're just repeating what they heard, kind of like a game of telephone.
yeah.
But the conventional wisdom that we heard is like, oh, we did a little bit of whole cluster, like you said, 25%, just to add that structure and body, and that's kind of the standard approach, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and Brent has really been one of pretty much the only person that's explained it to me kind of in layman's terms, that it helped me have that aha moment. So like I mentioned, the fermentation kinetics. So a lot of ferments getting like way too fast and ripping through way too quickly, and then you lose all of that nuance and that subtlety. But by doing whole cluster, the rachis, like the stems of the grapes, it actually slows down all of like that CO2 and that heat that's being permitted, and then by the time that it reaches the top, it's cooled down. And so it's this very natural way of coaxing out these flavors really, really gently. And I think that comes through in the wines too, but it's a subtlety that if you didn't understand this technique, maybe you wouldn't pick up on. So I don't know if that makes any sense, because I don't want to get like too technical, because I'm not even able to appropriately explain it. I would have to text Brent again, be like, tell me again, like, give me the, give me the gist. But he just explained it to me in such a capacity that I was like, oh, and like, there's only certain varieties that he'll do it with. Like he'll only do it with Pinot, for example. Cab Franc is another big one. Not that Brent uses that, but there are lots of winemakers that use whole cluster with Cab Franc and other varieties. But yeah. So did you have any revelations?
I'm still caught into sort of well, I mean, my biggest one is that I started to buy more of the SKUs that I liked this year, and less wide and more focused. So
Mm,
instead of saying, oh, we're going to try to buy, one or two or three SKUs from that we liked from every winery we visited, I just got a lot more ruthless, and I said I'd rather follow the same SKUs through multiple vintages. So I guess
yeah.
this was the first year I ever paid it. I thought I'd never going to pay attention to vintages, right? If I like a winery, if I like a winery style, I like a winemaker, I like a vineyard where a particular variety grows, I'm just going to ride or die with that.
Yeah.
And that thought was challenged for me this year,
Mm,
I guess. So I thought I figured out, okay, I like where Pinot's planted here and here and here in the valley, right? And that had held up for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, I think you and I were talking about this as well. I'm just not really that excited about the 2018 Pinots from the Okanagan. And I'm usually a big Okanagan Pinot guy. And so, yeah, I just learned I got to pay more attention to vintages now this year. And if I
yeah.
like one, I got to go all in on it.
Yep. Makes a massive difference. I got a text from a friend of mine who works as like a quality assurance manager for Peller. She's also a very loyal Crushable subscriber and purchaser. And she was telling me that 2019 is emerging as an outstanding vintage in the Okanagan, and I think the same is true of 2020 as well. So from what I've heard.
Yeah, and I did. So I didn't pay too much attention in 2019, but I did hear that the yields were cut in half, basically. So I think it's a very challenging year. About 2020, though, I do have a little bit of stuff to report, and I was actually hoping to ask you about Ontario as well. So in BC, and again, I haven't talked to everybody. It's just a small select group of winemakers that I care about and follow and what have you. And what I heard across the board was 2020. Everyone's very happy with the quality of 2020. And maybe
Mhm.
that's understating it a bit. I've heard a lot of positive stuff. Didn't do a ton of barrel samples, but the little bit I did do is it's exciting. Same thing though, this year was a little bit wetter than usual. And then we caught up, at least in Okanagan, we caught up with hotter temperatures in late summer. So everything was looking good. We had a little bit of forest fire from down south come up here, But again, everybody that I talked to basically said it was light. It's probably not going to affect us in any way. Of course, that still remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But yeah, nobody was worried about that. And they did say slightly less fruit this year than what they had planned on. But again, quality keeps going higher. So it seems like a pretty rosy report from BC. And if you were a standard consumer, you might be worried that the yields are lower. So are you gonna get your hand on some of the wines you like? But that's kind of why you're a Crushable member, because you know that we will definitely get our hands on that wine and we'll pass it on to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have any thoughts on or hear anything about the Ontario vintage this year?
Yeah, just sort of general sentiments. There's a lot of excitement. So if we look back to comparatively how unbelievably challenging and what a disaster the 2019 vintage was, like the snow and like how long it was, and this unintentional kind of like picking in the snow, not intending to make ice wine or anything like that, comparatively to this year, just sort of like how clean and smooth the whole year was. And I had an opportunity to actually go up to Creemore and help sort through some fruit, some Cab Franc with the guys from Theoryanthropy. And I was absolutely stunned at how beautiful and clean this fruit was. Like it was like picture perfect, like what you would see in, a textbook. And I just remember being there so thrilled and happy to be helping, but also thinking to myself, like, you don't need to do a damn thing to this fruit. And I was so happy that it was in the hands of David Iberg, because I know that he'll go on to do some really, really beautiful things. And then just other comments from like Ryan Corrigan from Rosewood. He said it was an outstanding vintage. Likewise from Paul Pender from Tawes. And that's sort of just been the general consensus. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how the wines will taste.
Nice. Hopefully a bounce back from crappy 2018. I don't think many people agree with me on
It
that.
tells a story, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Speaking of telling stories, so I'm going to be deliberately a little bit vague here,
You don't
but
have to be big.
yeah, we did want to peel back the curtain a little bit and talk to you guys about some of the things that we see going on at the back end of the industry. So if you follow our promotions, which you probably do because you're on the list and everything, you'll notice that a lot of people we talk to are very cool, chill, down to earth people. They're farmers basically. They're phlegmatic. They go with the flow. Generally, we try to work with people that are like that. But there's another funny side to the industry that Laura and I, especially Laura, gets to see more often than not. And we were sitting here one morning, gosh, just a couple months ago, and one of the winemakers that we had worked with and we really like, he had done an interview with a fairly well-known wine publication, and he was talking about his low intervention process, and he even admittedly said afterwards, I could have been more specific, but there was no agenda to it. Just like questions were getting fired off, he was answering, it was part promotion, part interview, so on and so forth. So the interview goes out and it was about hands-off techniques, or the lack of techniques, I guess, whatever you want to say. And another winemaker in the valley who prides himself on being a low intervention winemaker, natural, whatever, organic farmer, emailed him. And it wasn't just that he took, it wasn't just that he was upset with the way the interview was worded. It's like this dude thought he was natural wine police. And the bizarre arrogance and anger in this couple of sentence email that he sent to this young winemaker, instead of just saying, hey man, did you mean to say this or whatever, it was like I said, like he came in as the wine police, which was really funny because, and I'm not going to name names because that'd be a little too catty, but the guy who sent the angry email makes the most fucking forgettable, generic, mediocre shit wine. And he's so goddamn proud of himself because he farms organically, as if that means anything once it, to the consumer, once if it tastes like crap. So that's a big preamble to warm up. But Laura, I think that you had a few thoughts on that, and you've seen that far too often, I think, in this industry.
I've seen it far too often now that I've really established what my niche is. And of course, there's always a certain expectation of pushback, especially with the category of natural wine. I mean, the label itself is misleading. And then there's just a lot of intimidation and jealousy, or a certain feeling of being left behind, I would say, where, you know, there's young up and coming winemakers that are experimenting. They're relatively fearless, and they're not scared to take risks. And so maybe these other winemakers, and I don't know that generation or age necessarily has to do with it. It's more of an attitude. They're threatened, and yeah, they feel like they're getting maybe passed by as this category grows, and picks up momentum. And so what I've seen is the exposure of a hell of a lot of ego, really fragile, massive egos, and the audacity of people, and the way that pretty much strangers have spoken to me is really eye-opening. And it doesn't bother me. I think it's funny, it's entertaining. And I mean, we'll probably, you know, turn it into some emails and use it as content. Um, it's like, stay in your lane, make wine that a lot of people purchase, and you can't be everything to everybody. And if you try, you're going to be nothing to nobody. Like, it's so, I'm failing to wrap my head around why these people care so much, and the lengths and energy that they go to. And like a lot of similar examples we could share after my putting out the low intervention guide, the number of messages and trolling and harassment that happened on social media, and people were so up in arms. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, Jesus, like, you don't even make wine this way. Like, I couldn't fathom having that level of arrogance, being so angry that I wasn't included in a guide that I had no place being a part of in the first place. Like, I can't wrap my head around it, but it's so entertaining and comedic to me. And like, I think that's the only response that's necessary in this case, because getting angry about it is just wasted breath. So, yeah.
It's very funny. I think there's a tendency in the industry, especially with like, let's say winemakers or winery owners who are also involved in production, is that they're willing to forgive them and their friends a little bit of promotion, right? So every interview, every tasting, every event you go to, every restaurant, distributor, whatever critic you connect with, there's a mixture of like tech sheet and promotion.
Yeah.
And is necessary. It's absolutely necessary. If you just did tech sheet, everyone would be bored to death. If you just did promotion, there's no substance. So there's a combination of the two. We do the same thing at Crushable. There's a certain amount of promotion and storytelling and entertaining that goes on, you know, finding the stories from these people and putting your best foot forward. And I think that a lot of the winemakers, what we've seen behind the scenes, they get angry about like, oh, that low intervention wine movement, or, oh, that person's not being totally 100% said what happened. And it's like, okay, buddy, it's good when you do it. It's okay when you do a little promotion. You're willing to let that leeway because, you know, you attribute good faith to yourself. But all of a sudden, when you see somebody else doing a little bit of promotion, all of a sudden they're a charlatan and they're this. And then it's like, okay, well, if you don't like the wine, don't drink it. Taste the wine. The wine's good. So,
Well, and it's also, I was watching a live on Instagram the other day, and calling out a lot of this nonsense and these misnomers about natural wine. It's like, it's not a flavor, it's a philosophy. Natural wine is not attributed to hazy or funky wine. Like, and if that's the case, and if you like that, fill your boots. But that doesn't mean that all natural wine is like that. And that's what I really struggle with, and get so tired of having to provide a disclaimer. It's like, no, this isn't all going to be bad, funky shit, like diaper juice in a bottle. Like, there's a lot of that, and we have to rifle through like a lot of garbage. I mean, and I've been telling you, some of the wines I've been buying lately, I'm like, what is this? Like,
but yes,
bottle.
because technique and ideology doesn't make a good wine by itself, right?
No. And
So
I mean, I
that's,
don't want to be paying for someone else's experiment, but I mean, it's sort of necessary in where we're at in the journey of Canadian wine. Like, yes, we need to be encouraging innovation, but they also need to be explaining, okay, we're just figuring this out for the first time. And it might cost us, and we're going to maybe have to like throw it away and try it again next year. I don't know. And that's why we really have to double down and be pretty ruthless in terms of what we'll permit and what we won't. Because if we try to include everybody under the term of low intervention, then we may as well just make a Canadian winery guide. Like,
right. Yeah.
right?
Which is actually when I moved to the Okanagan, that's basically the only thing that existed. So I'm glad that you're doing this. And again, I want to stress, like, I drink very little natty wine, probably mostly just based on your recommendations a lot of times, and we don't even agree on that 100%. I love classically made wine. I love that we offered the Avril Creek Semeno series that was sort of the like we kept saying, the innovations that Brent was learning in the other areas, he's bringing to more
Mhm.
classical lineup there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of the information that's floating around is basically tells you to go, I'll give you an example. Drive down to Oliver. It's a beautiful drive. It's a great day to spend in the South Okanagan. And if you read any wine guide, it'll basically tell you to stop at the biggest industrial winery with opulence and everything, but the wine is hollow. It has nothing going on. It's
Yeah.
shallow wine, and then it'll tell you to go across the street to some mom and pop place where they make fruit wine, where where there's just big bags of sugar outside, and they're delightful people, right? And they sell like 100 bottles a year. And then it'll tell you to go next across the street to maybe an artisanal winemaker who's been killing themselves and barely making a profit just to produce their vision, and it'll talk about all three wineries with the same level of information and reverence and what have you. And it's
Mhm.
ultimately that's not very helpful for the consumer. If everything is relative and everything is equal, well then I'm just on my own now. I have to go taste everything. So what's the use?
Well, and especially with the curiosity that exists, especially like within our generation and even like our successors and the people that are a little bit older than us, the access that people have to information now, they're far more educated than they used to be, and so there needs to be more resources provided for them within this niche that helps them to expand upon that knowledge. And I thought that it was a little bit redundant, focusing on this category. But I mean, if we really think about like, okay, who are some of the purveyors of natural wine that are really killing it in the game? Like Alice Fearing, like she's written a couple decent books, like maybe Jamie Good. Um, but I mean, in terms of like access within Canada, it doesn't really exist. And so we're sort of carving out our own little niche right now. And like, that's kind of exciting. And I think that's why we have to be very strict and like maintain a certain level of discipline about like who we will allow under the umbrella. And like, I don't want this to be confused with us being super exclusionary. That's not the intent, but it's a recognition of this hard work that people are putting in that is incredibly difficult. And that's really my intention, is to shed light on the people that are literally doing back-breaking work to do this, because it's a hell of a lot harder to make wine in this capacity. And it's not really possible in certain areas. Like that's why it was so challenging when I was putting the guide together, because especially here in Ontario, it's really hard to find people that are like through and through 100% making 0 wine, because it's just on that line, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't
And
know. Time
it's
will tell.
it's a imperfect nesting of categories. So you kind of have
Yeah.
an overarching category that a lot of wineries fit into because they're conscious of it or they're putting in effort. And then the next nest down, and I say imperfect because there's going to be some bleed, right? Like we're not
Yeah.
perfect, obviously. We're not saying you should only drink 0 0. I would never say that because I don't believe that at all. But it's cool to know who's doing it at least so that you can start making choices. And that's basically what we're about, is informed choices.
Yeah, it's just disclosure. It's like, because if they're not
Yeah.
legally required to put the label, what the ingredients on the label, then maybe we can help the consumer to understand. And I was talking with
Totally.
Costa Gavaris from Rigor and Whimsy about this the other day. And I was like, I'm getting to a point in my journey where I want to drink well-made wine, and it's okay
Yeah.
to say that out loud. Whereas before, maybe I would have been a little bit embarrassed and like, oh, there's sulfur in this wine. Oh my God, that is just sacrilege. Like I'm a little bit more forgiving now, the more that I've learned. And he attested to feeling the same way. He's like, yeah, you can't just bottle diaper juice and call it natty and slap a cool label on it. And that's what I have a lot of respect for them about. They acknowledge and, you know, disclose that they use conventional fruit in some cases. And even like Kelsey at Echo Bay, she's like, I had to use reverse osmosis on some barrels at one point in time in the past. And it's just about this transparency, as redundant as that may seem. It's
I
more
agree.
necessary than ever because the category is so gray. So
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's better for the winemaker too to have the freedom to decide to do an interview with somebody like us or not than say a governing body like everyone's favorite governing bodies, BC Liquor Board or LCBO or whatever. I imagine they're coming down on them and saying, okay, this is what you need to say and do and whatever. Like, no one wants more of that. I mean, I guess a few insane people do because they profit from it, but now we
Yeah,
consumers don't. We don't want
exactly.
that. So that's an interesting pivot then to I think in 2021, just to give people a preview, and I don't want to set expectations that we can't meet, but I can say this: we are aiming to offer at least one, possibly more wines from the province of Quebec.
Mhm.
And Laura never tires of telling me stories about Quebec wineries she wants to try and learn more about and offer. And I'm super skeptical about it. So I wanted to give her a platform and just talk to us what specifically is going on in Quebec that you're so excited about, and what are you seeing from over there?
Well, it really comes down to respecting and trusting my peers and colleagues that are recommending wineries to me. And so through some of the articles that I've written this past year, like the guide, and then also like I did a roundup of like little gems that you should, discover within Canada. And so many people recommended all these little like micro wineries and negociants that I'd never heard of in Quebec. And so I started reaching out to them over Instagram, and they were so gracious and approachable and so open and willing to share. And they're like, oh, and you got to check out this guy, and you got to check out this guy. And I'm talking beyond just like Pinard des Fils and like Les Pervenches, like those are the ones that everybody knows. I'm talking about like the little guys like Lieu Comment, and oh, my brain is failing me right now, but like I don't know, you can like edit this out, I can't think of any, but there's so many
It's
that I
live.
list.
It's live, baby. It's gonna stay like
Oh,
this.
okay. Yeah, I'm failing to. Domaine, L'Espiègle. Like, there's all these little tiny guys that are not only farming like completely biodynamically and totally naturally, they're also carrying that through into the cellar. And that was really what was eye-opening for me when I started to compile this list. And they're doing it all with hybrids. And so I thought that that was so cool. And I was talking to Brent Roland about this. He's kind of become my mentor, I guess, in certain ways. And I was like, I'm so impressed that they're making wines this way, because it seems to me as though it's a really, really challenging place to make wine. And he was like, no, maybe it's not that challenging. Maybe it's just that they've chosen the right and more appropriate and specific styles of grapes to plant in these areas. And so I'm only just starting to venture into these areas. I just had some samples sent to me. And so I'm slowly kind of like tasting through, and I'm really excited about what I'm encountering. The only downside is, once again, a government body that operates as a monopoly that might give us a little bit of trouble, but I'm hoping that we can find some loopholes and find our way and navigate through this. But yeah, like fingers crossed, knock on wood, that we can find at least one producer that we can feature and get it out to people in BC that they never would have otherwise had an opportunity to try. So that's what's really exciting. And especially right now, there's so much bullshit that's happening that the government is pulling. Like, I don't know if you they're shutting down all liquor sales for all small bottle shops and restaurants in BC at 8 p.m. on the
Right, because
biggest
if
rodeo.
people bought alcohol after 8:30, there'd be chaos in the streets.
Allegedly. It's so
Yeah.
stupid. It's like, this is one of the biggest sales. Like most restaurants and liquor stores, October, November, December is like literally where they make most of their margin. And so
Yeah,
like
for
a
sure.
day before, during a pandemic, when they're barely struggling to stay open as it is, oh yeah, you got to shut down your sales at 8 p.m. It just boils my blood. And I've been saying to so many people, I'm like, now do you see that the government doesn't have your back? Do you see it now? Like,
They obviously have our back because it's going to end up being even better for our business. But boy, I wish that wasn't the case.
yeah. So that's another motivating factor. It's like, okay, the government is literally making it as hard as possible for small business to thrive. And so I'm like, okay, here we go, strap in. We're doing this.
Yep. And wineries people are going to have to be liquid. They're going to have to watch their spending and borrowing. And in many ways, unfortunately, it's going to lead to, well, not unfortunately, it's unfortunate the way it came about, but it's going to lead to stronger business practices because people are not going to be able to coast at all anymore. Like there's
Yeah.
no margin for error whatsoever anymore. Um, Speaking of that, you were saying we don't know if we can find somebody to ship from Quebec. during my brief period living in La Belle Provence, I'm pretty sure we'll find somebody who's okay doing gray market wine sales.
I hope
Can feel that's
so.
part of the culture there that I really liked. Speaking about just finding off the beaten track producers, what we realized this year in Crushable, and with some resistance from ourselves, is that, and we heard from a lot of people, yeah, how come you guys don't recommend more? Like, tell me more. What else should I be looking at? And one of the things that Laura expanded into doing was sourcing and finding some high-end gourmet food producers that have the same level of quality that we've come to expect from the wine producers we work with. Because let's face it, as much as we want to front that we're total degens who just drink wine all day, uh, we, we do. I mean, it's part of the pleasure of life to pair wine with food, and I could never imagine, wine just on its own. Right? It's part of this kind of symphony in your house, and so yeah, I think we're very excited in 2021 to keep working with a company that some of you have heard of from us. We were able to do a special offer for some of our final wine buyers of the year, and we'll be kind of rolling out more of these offers to a larger audience as we get them. But talk to us about Soul Farmers, Laura.
Yeah, so I came across them through a colleague of mine here in Toronto, just because I had such a abundance of virtual tastings I was doing in December, and a lot of people were asking for food pairings. It's a little bit of a pain, but I had also started to enjoy a lot of these like conserva tinned fish, which is like a really high-end like delicacy from Spain that I also had come recommended by Brent Rowland. He's just my guru of life apparently. And so I was connected to these guys. They're a wholesaler based out of Ottawa, and I used them for several virtual tastings. And I was so impressed with not only their selection, but like how quick the turnaround time was for shipping and how lovely they were to work with. And
Oh
just
yeah.
everything just sort of fell into place, and everything aligned really beautifully. Not to mention the selection of food that they have is just phenomenal and pairs so beautifully with the wines that we like to drink. So I already have them slated for some more virtual tastings in 2021, and I hope that we can feature them again. And they did put together this gorgeous package for our last Averill Creek collaboration that was only available to the Averill Creek buyers. So I'm hoping that we can do that again, or maybe in the future, throw little surprises from them in future packs. Like, I don't know what that's going to look like, but yeah, just offering more, I don't know, things that we really enjoy beyond just wine, like you were saying.
Yeah, I like to call them rewards for our crushable purchasers and supporters. When you
Yeah.
buy wine from us, you should know that we're out there looking for other cool stuff for you to try.
Yeah.
And not just Soul Farmers put together an awesome basket, but like they went above and beyond offering a discount to our
Yeah.
crushable members too. It was crazy. I said, you don't have to offer a discount. Like, the wineries don't really offer discounts. It's just
Yeah.
about good products. And they said, no, we want to reward them. So yeah, look for way more of that in 2021. We're going to keep searching for producers across Canada, distributors, all that kind of thing that just kind of make your house a better place. And I'm not going to say to replace going outside, but why be sad in the meantime for stuck at home? And might as well be stuck at home in
Yeah.
luxury beauty.
Totally. Yeah.
And on that note, too, I kind of wanted to wrap up by asking you to tell us some of the new things you started offering this year. For me, one of the most exciting ones was the family or corporate events that you were able to put on now in lieu of public tastings.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if you know this about me, but anyone who's close to me knows that, I'm a bit of a late bloomer, and I'm very averse to doing anything that everybody else is doing. That's just, I don't know why that is, but so when COVID really started to pick up, and everybody started doing like lives on Instagram, and everyone was moving virtual, I was like, ugh, gross. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, ugh, no, thank you. I'm just going to postpone everything until this all blows over, until people started approaching me. And I was like, okay, I don't think that I can be, putting this off any longer. And so once I started doing them, and I got really great reception, because I really made sure what my whole philosophy is. Like, we've all been to super snore fest wine seminars where it's just there's regurgitating technical data. There's like a PowerPoint presentation that looks like it came out of the late 90s. It's just so boring and like it needs to be reinvented. And so I try to make my tastings fun. And I know everybody says that, and I almost hate that I'm saying that out loud, but I almost like to inject a little bit of shock value. And I like to describe wine differently than maybe most would. Like I have some analogies where I talk about like plastic surgery and various others that people are like, did she just say that? And I have been working with this one corporate client and I've lost count how many tastings they've booked me for because they just love how unconventional my approach is. Like it's just, I try to be refreshing and maybe take note of what works and what doesn't. And that's what's really been eye-opening for me is like, why do people continue doing these wine seminars that are so boring and they just keep doing the same thing and they never evolve, they never change. It's like that definition of insanity. And I can't wrap my head around why people aren't reinventing how things are done in the wine industry. And so I think that's maybe why I've had such good success.
So just to take you back a couple of steps here, just to describe to the people who don't know what you're talking about, it's not really a seminar. So she's putting on special events for people virtually. Could you just kind of walk us through the actual specific process that you do? Because it's like collect a list, mail out, right? And it's all timed for a certain
Yeah,
day.
it's a lot more complicated than people might think behind the scenes. So I'll get a list of anywhere from like 40 to 80 people, and then I have to fulfill all these wine orders. I have to select a winery that I want to feature. I have had some requests for like those little bottles where you get like 2 or 3 ounces, but it's just too much of a hassle. It's like, you know what, get the full bottle, invite your family and friends in, whoever's in your bubble. So we'll do 2 to 4 bottles per person, generally one winery. And then if they want food pairings, I'll either send the food pairing separately or we'll include them in the pack. And then we'll do a Zoom call. And I recommend everybody has their cameras on. You know, I want them to engage and participate and have it feel more like a gathering as opposed to me just talking to the camera for an hour. Like that's so bloody boring. And you lose people that way. And not to mention they're drinking as we're going along. So it gets really fun about 3/4 of the way through where they don't even care anymore. They just want to chat and they want to tell me about like where they've been and who they visited. And they want to know like where I recommend in like various wine regions throughout the province or, you know, wherever they might happen to be.
Yeah, so it turns into a conversation, more like a roundtable conversation as opposed to a stuffy, everybody mute your microphone and listen to me.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very similar to my in-person tastings when I was doing them. People would come and then it would just literally just turn into us sharing our life stories. And that's what I really enjoy. And a lot of people have commented on that. They're like, this takes a very specific type of person. And absolutely, I would have to agree with that. You'd have to really enjoy meeting new people and being social. But that's just innately the kind of person that I am. Like when we were allowed to travel, that's exactly what I did. I want to hear about I want to learn from you just as much as you're learning from me. And I think that that's why it's been so successful. And then also from a strategic point, it's been really beneficial to the growth of Crushable because they're like, oh, you're pouring us wines that we didn't even know existed. So then they're signing up for email list and yada, yada, yada. So it's this great sort of symbiotic relationship that has been really successful. So yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is
tasting with me.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to just tee that up. If you're a family, let's say, and it's a family reunion year, and instead of, like I said, instead of being choked that you can't get together in person, this is an opportunity. If you want to honor somebody with a certain special birthday, or if you're part of a corporate team and you guys are struggling to find team building activities and so on to reward your staff, then how should they proceed? Is there a minimum order requirement, and how much time ahead of time do they need to let you know?
Yeah, generally I would say if you're only 2 people, it's not, I'm going to probably decline it. It's just not worth my time. And also it's probably a little bit too costly. But I'm doing a birthday for like, I think 6 nurses on Monday. I did a birthday for 12 friends a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, just send me an email or reach out to me on Instagram, Silk and Coop, and just let me know like what you're after, like stylistically. I try obviously just because of what we focus on to keep it within like the Canadian natural niche. But if that's not your jam, then we can look at doing international varieties as well. And yeah, generally it runs around an hour and a bit, but it can be tailored to like whatever you want it to be. I always include like suggestions for food pairings, and generally that happens to be whatever I'm enjoying at the moment. Mortadella almost always is included in my suggestions for food pairings.
Yeah,
because mortadella is just the best.
it's the best.
Would be
Yeah.
like probably like my death row meal or one of them. Yeah, it's really casual, and I guess that's one last thing that I should say. In comparing myself, and I mean I know that we do that just as human beings, to a lot of my peers and what they were doing, and it was so structured and formal, and I was kind of beating myself up a little bit and like, no, I don't need to be like them. I can do it my own way, and my own way is very casual and flight and fancy free, and I like it that way. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been a great year. We're super thankful for all the support from everybody, from the wineries we work with. Extremely thankful that we know them, and we've been sort of blessed to become better friends, a little bit closer with some of the wineries we work with. Great people. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that I missed out on, or did we kind of cover everything today?
Yeah, just a massive thank you. I mean, to anybody who's watched the entirety of this, I commend you. But just huge thank you to all of our subscribers, and just keep reaching out. Like, we absolutely love when you email and you share your tasting notes, and like we'll use them like in for our content. Yeah, just we love the interaction. Like that's what we live for. So don't ever feel like you can't reach out. Like, I'm literally on my laptop every morning answering emails and wanting to hear what people are up to. And even if it's not a crushable wine or something like that, like, or a discovery that you came across, like, let us know. That's
Yeah.
what this is about. It's about building relationships. So
Yeah, ask us questions, whatever. That's what we're open for. So last time, what was the best email then for them to get in touch with you at for tastings, or with with Crushable for questions, that kind of thing?
for anything, it's just info@crushable.club. Just reach
Beautiful.
out with whatever you might need.
All right, guys. Anything you need, from canned fish to wine to party favors, we got it. Thanks a lot
Or
for listening.
wine analogies.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Laura. Take care.
Yeah. Cheers.